everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Robin, or A Hobbit's Reading List, and today I want to tell you about a readathon I created for September called the Tolkien Readathon. So I know there are a lot of readathons in September, but September is also like a big month for the Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Tolkien fandom, because it's the month of Bilbo and Frodo's birthday. So I put together a readathon, and there are a couple different ways that you could do it. So the idea is that you're reading a book for a prompt, which gets you, once you complete it, gets you further on their journey through Middle-earth. That's pretty much the gist of it. I'm gonna go through the different options, but to start, there are technically 2, but could be 3 if you really want to be like a little chaotic, different paths-ish. There's the Hobbit path, the Lord of the Rings path, and then the, what I'm calling Middle-earth Explorer path. Pretty much, the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings paths follow those storylines. Each major location has a prompt based around it, and within each path, the prompt may change depending on which character you're focusing on. So, for example, for The Hobbit, Bilbo in the Misty Mountains, his prompt is actually Riddles in the Dark, which is to read a book with a ring on the cover because he finds the ring in the Misty Mountains, whereas the dwarf focus in the Misty Mountains is to read a book with a goblin or similar creature on the cover. So it's different depending on which character you're focusing on. And then I think Gandalf also has one in the Misty Mountains, which is to read a book about reuniting, because that's when he comes back to meet with the dwarves and Bilbo. So I had a lot of fun putting it together. I'm gonna make it look all, I've made it look all like pretty, although it's a little hard to read, so I will be just including the list of prompts for people. So I figured, oh, and then Middle-earth Explorer is just if you don't want to pick a particular path or a character, you can just read prompts, and then based on the Frankensteining of it, you can figure out how far you get in Middle-earth. you can go to Erebor, or you can go to Mordor. That's up to you. But I had a lot of fun putting it together. I'm excited. I don't know which path I'm going to take yet. I'm waiting until I know what books I have to read in September for my literature classes, and then that will sort of determine which path I'm taking. So I thought I would just go through each focus. There are 11. Sort of talk about the prompts a little bit, and then everything that you need will be linked in the description. The different graphics, the prompt list itself, a link to the Discord, which I do have so that I can just see how many people are doing it and how you're doing, and support people. I just thought it'd be sort of fun. And I will also have reading trackers by the 1st of the month. I don't have those made yet. And the final thing before I go into all the prompts is that if you want to do a particular path, but there's like a prompt that you're not into, like my dad had this whole thing when he was looking at the list about not wanting to read a book with a horse on the cover, which I'm like, okay. Since this is a Tolkien readathon, if you read anything written by Tolkien, you can use that to replace a prompt that you don't want to do or don't think you can do or what have you. And that's any book by Tolkien. It doesn't have to be Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. It could be Letters to Father Christmas. It could be Beowulf. Anything by Tolkien. You can use that as a replacement. Although I feel like sometimes that makes it a little bit, not harder, but more time consuming, because Tolkien was very verbose. So his books are usually longer. And I am going to be reading them off my list because I don't have them memorized. Because there are 11 different paths. So for The Hobbit, we have the Hobbit focus. For most of them, I did specify the character where it was needed, but like for the Hobbits and Lord of the Rings. But most of them I just did the different races. So for the Hobbit, the bag end prompt is to read while eating, which I feel is self-explanatory, but there is the party at Bilbo's house at the beginning of the book where everyone's eating, so. At the Trollshaws, it is to read a book about cooking, because, you know, the trolls are trying to cook them, and Bilbo's helping. Rivendell is to read while outside. A lot of the activity prompts are when all the characters are together, and or the prompts are the same if all the characters are all together and sort of experiencing the same sort of thing. Riddles in the Dark is, like I said, Bilbo's journey in Misty Mountains. So his prompt is to read a book with a ring on the cover. It doesn't have to be prominent, it can be on someone's hand. The Eagle's prompt is to read a book from your highest shelf. And Beorn is to read a book while near an animal. So I guess technically you could combine Rivendell and Beorn if you don't have like a pet or something. You could read outside and just look around and see if you're near a bird or a squirrel or something. So that counts. Mirkwood, which is to read a book including invisibility. It doesn't have to be a major plot point, but at some point if a character goes invisible, or if they're a ghost that can't be seen, that would count as well. These are all open to interpretation, by the way. I'm not going to be like fact-checking anyone. Like, if you say it fits the prompt, it fits the prompt. You're reading. That's what really matters. Lake Town, which is to read a book that includes a sickness, because Lake Town is where Bilbo gets a cold after the plunge down the river. Which I'm just like, yeah, he's mainly sick through Lake Town, so that'll be the prompt. Erebor is to read a book with a dragon on the cover, and I feel like if you've read The Hobbit, that one's a little self-explanatory. The dwarf focus for The Hobbit, a lot of these are going to be similar. So at Bag End, it's to read while eating. The Trollshaws, however, is to read a book about theft, because their ponies are stolen. Rivendell is to read while outside. The Misty Mountains, like I said before, is to read a book with a goblin or similar creature on the cover. I know that, like, there are different interpretations of goblin, and even that might be a little, like, narrowing. So if you look at a cover and be like, that looks like a goblin to me, great. Eagles, read a book from the highest shelf. Beorn, read while near an animal. Mirkwood, read a book that includes being trapped, because all the dwarves are imprisoned for about a month while in Mirkwood. Lake Town, read a book with a fish on the cover. The dwarves were fine in Lake Town. They didn't have a lot going on besides like meeting with people and stuff and gathering supplies, but I remember they did eat a lot of fish. So, and then Erebor, read a book with a mountain on the cover. I could have done gold, but I think I did that somewhere else. And I try not to repeat prompts where, you know, it wasn't all the characters doing sort of the same thing. So I tried. Sometimes I didn't have any other options. Finally, for The Hobbit, the wizard focus is Bag End, read while eating. The Trollshaws is to read a book about a disagreement. And so you'll notice that, like, I sort of combined the books and movie happenings, because I did most of this based off of memory. So sometimes the movies are a little more prominent in my head, but in the Hobbit movie at least, and I just read the Hobbit book a couple months ago, so I should remember this part. I believe Gandalf and Thorin had a disagreement. Yes. In both, in the Trollshaws. So Rivendell, read while outside. The Misty Mountains, read a book about reuniting, like I said. The Eagles, read a book from the highest shelf. Beorn, read while near an animal. Gandalf has an extra one. Well, 2 extra ones technically. He has Dol Guldur because he goes off and, you know, he just wanders off. No, he goes and battles Sauron while the dwarves are trapped in Mirkwood. He doesn't know about that. But for Dol Guldur, read a book about the undead. So this includes zombies, vampires, ghosts, whatever else you would consider undead. Not picky. Because Sauron at that time is called the Necromancer, so I thought that would be appropriate. And then to wrap him up, he is at Dale, so the prompt for that is read a book involving betrayal. Because Gandalf doesn't betray anyone, but he's sort of a bystander for Bilbo's betrayal. So, but other than that, he didn't do much in Dale. So that's the Hobbit path. You can pick whichever path. Like I said, you can replace a book with a Tolkien book if you want to do the dwarf path, but you don't like one of the books or whatever. That's totally fine. I will say, I feel like the Hobbit path is a little bit easier because there aren't as many. If you want something a little more intense, I have the Lord of the Rings paths. This one gets a little, a little bit much, because we have characters just wandering around willy-nilly. Not willy-nilly, it's for a purpose, but makes it hard to do a readathon, because at some point they all eventually break off from each other, except for Legolas and Gimli. Those two are together the entire time. So for the Hobbit focus for Lord of the Rings, I have 3 different paths for you. I have 3 different focuses within that focus. So the first half of this is going to be all the same, and so I'm going to go through the first half and then I'll delineate based off the characters' paths. So for the Hobbit, Bag End, it always starts with Bag End. Bag End is to read a book involving a party, because when we're in the Shire and Lord of the Rings is when a lot of the focus is on celebrating Bilbo and Frodo's birthday party. So, Buckleberry Fairy is to read a book involving water. Bree is to read a book with a horse on the cover because of the prancing pony. Weathertop is to read a historical or historical fiction book. Rivendell is to read a book about a meeting because of Elrond's counsel. Moria is flip a coin to decide between books. Lothlorien is to read a book about grief. And it doesn't need to be a major plot point. Like, none of these need to be major plot points. It can just have like a mention or a subplot or whatever. And then The Falls of Rauros is to read a book involving a hard decision. So that's the first half of the Hobbit focus for Lord of the Rings. Here's where we split off based off characters. So for Frodo and Sam's focus, we have Emyn Muil, which is to read a book about a pet, because they kind of treat Gollum like a naughty pet for that part. I thought I was being funny. I still think I'm being funny. And then you have The Dead Marshes, which is to read a book with a candle on the cover, because it said that the dead people in the marshes hold candles, have their own little light to lure people in. And then in Ithilien, read a book involving a hostage situation. If you read the book, you know that like Sam and Frodo are kind of detained a little bit. Minas Morgul, which is read a book involving a betrayal. So, like I said, I try not to repeat prompts, but sometimes it was just too good. And then Mount Doom, read the last book in a series. So you're gonna see that a lot around Mordor, because I was like, I don't know any of the prompt that I haven't already used. So there's that. For Merry, after The Falls of Rauros, we get The Wold, which is to read a book about an injury, because Merry is injured for most of his time captured by the orcs as they're going through the Wold. Fangorn, read a book with trees on the cover. Isengard, read a book about reuniting, because that's when most of the Fellowship came back together. Edoras, which is to read a horror book. I sort of went that route with Merry because he had to see Pippin with the Plantier, and that was really scary, and so that's just kind of that was kind of my logic because Edoras is not a scary place by itself. Dunharrow, which is to read a book about a secret identity, because both him and Eowyn are trying to, you know, go under the cover. And then Minas Tirith, which is to read a book with a blade on the cover. So that is Merry. And then finally for the Hobbit, focus on the Lord of the Rings path. I guess if you're focusing on the character, it would be a specialty, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. For Pippin, after the Falls of Westeros, we have The Wold, which is to read a book with leaf or leaves in the title. You can, if you're really struggling with that one, I put a note that you can stretch that to leaves or leaf in the cover. You know, just because he drops the brooch of Leaf of Lorien, and that's how Aragorn, you know, sort of continues tracking them. And then Fangorn, read a book with trees on the cover. Isengard, read a book about reuniting. Edoras, read a book with orb in the title or on the cover. Because of the Plantier, it's an orb. Minas Tirith, read a book about fire, because of the whole Faramir thing. I'm trying not to give spoilers for the books, too, so I'm like... and then the Blackgates, read a book about trolls, which... I don't really want to explain that one, but if you've read the Battle of the Blackgates, you probably know why I picked trolls. So that is the Hobbit focus. Now we're moving on to men. The race of men. We only have two specialties for this one. We have Aragorn and Boromir. You'll see why I hesitate on Boromir in a second. So for Aragorn, the man is busy. Alright, for Bree, read a book with the word darkness in the title. Weathertop, read a historical fiction book. Rivendell, read a book about a meeting. Moria, flip a coin to decide between books. A lot of these are the same. Lothlorien, read a book about a grief. Falls of Westeros, read a book involving a difficult decision. The Wold, now we have some differences. Read a book with hunt in the title, because during that time they called themselves the Three Hunters. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and I thought that was cute. Edoras, read a book with a horse on the cover. Helm's Deep, read a book with a sword on the cover. I'll take blade of any sort, really. I don't want to limit people too much. Isengard, read a book with the Chosen One trope. Paths of the Dead, read a book about ghosts. Minas Tirith, read a book while doing self-care. So I chose this one because you might be thinking, there's so much in Minas Tirith for Aragorn, like, why? I mainly focused on the houses of healing, and so I can't say read a book while healing someone. So read a book while healing yourself, doing self-care. Because I remember, and try not to do too many spoilers. So, and the only other thing I was thinking would be a spoiler, so self-care. And then finally, the Blackgates, read the last book in a series. I think the Blackgate, anything involving Mordor, I think is that prompt. So, and then we're at Boromir. So, Boromir only has 4 prompts. One of my friends who really loves Boromir pointed out I could have done like 6, but I had already like finished the list, created the graphic. So if you want something more manageable, I would suggest Boromir's list because it's only 4 books. So Boromir, Rivendell, read a book about a meeting. Moria, flip a coin to decide between books. These are all the same. Lothlorien, read a book about grief. Falls of Westeros, read a book about redemption. Because I think that Boromir really redeems himself by the end. And obviously, what happened to him was not his fault. It was the ring. I'm a Boromir stan. as much as I can be. I do like Boromir. I think he's a very complicated character and I really enjoy him, but he's not my favorite just because my favorite is Pippin. And they're pretty different. Okay, the dwarf specialty. Erebor, read a book with gold in the title. Rivendell, read a book about a meeting. Moria, flip a coin to decide between books. Lothlorien, read a book about grief. Falls of Ragnaros, because for whatever reason, I didn't include the wold with... Sorry, a cat is walking underneath my tripod. I didn't include the wold with Gimli and Legolas. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe I just felt like the map would be too busy. Falls of Ragnaros, read a book with the word hunt in the title. So I sort of like combined those two. Fangorn, read a horror book because Gimli really didn't like Fangorn Forest. Edoras, read a book with a horse on the cover. Helm's Deep, read a book about a wager. Isengard, read a book about a road trip. You know, I just felt like Gimli had a little bit of a different vibe than everyone else, so I felt like he was just on like road tripping. Paths of the Dead, read a book about ghosts. Minas Tirith, read a book with stone or stones on the cover. And then the Black Gates, read the last book in a series. So for Legolas, a lot of his prompts are very similar to Gimli's. So I'm only going to say the ones that are different. Mirkwood, which is his starting point, read a book about a prisoner. His prompt in Fangorn is to read a history or historical fiction book. His prompt for Isengard is to read a book about reunions. Paths of the Dead is to read a book with a seagull or bird on the cover. Seagull is very specific, so if you only do bird, that is also fine. Those are the only different ones for Legolas. He's very similar to Gimli. And then, finally, the wizard focus for Lord of the Rings. For the Shire, read a book about a party. Isengard, read a book featuring a betrayal. Rivendell, read a book about a meeting. Moria, read a book with a bridge on the cover. Gandalf, I was very specific. And then the time and space prompt is to read a sci-fi book. At one point, after Moria, I don't want to give away spoilers, he says that he was floating through time and space. So that was just too perfect. Fangorn, read a book about reunions. Edoras, read a book about witchcraft. Helm's Deep, read a book with a horse on the cover. That horse prompt, that was a saving grace a lot of times. Minas Tirith, read a book about politics. The Black Gates, read the last book in a series. And then for Gandalf, I included his final destination point. I was going to include that for everyone else as well, but when I was making the graphic, it made it I would have had two bag ends, and I felt like that was just, it was too much. But with Gandalf on the graphic, it worked. Because his final destination is Valinor, so read a book with a garden on it. So those are all the different prompts for the Tolkien Readathon. Like I said, I will have a whole thing for you to access online so that you can look at it. And other than that, I'm really excited. I will be putting up my TBR for the Tolkien Readathon, you know, in about a week. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to it. And I think the prompts are going to stay the same next year and the year after that. So because there's so many different options, you can either pick a different specialty or focus, or you can pick up where you left off. If you do someone like Aragorn, who has like 14 prompts, you can pick up where you left off and then, you know, try to finish in Mordor. So I feel like there are a lot of different options. So hopefully people will join me, and if not, that's cool too. It's a nice little just change for myself. And yeah, Leave a comment, tell me if you think this is interesting, if you want to do it. Like the video, subscribe, click the notification bell so that you get notified when I start uploading vlogs for the Tolkien Readathon. But otherwise, I will check you guys later. Bye!